All right, so welcome along to a Cinco de Mayo edition of Off the Brawl, your boxing show here on Off the Ball. Delighted to be joined as ever by former middleweight champion of the world, Andy Lee. Andy, how are things?
Good. Same as every other day. since we last spoke. That's a good while now.
Yeah, it's
Since
a
we
few weeks now.
reviewed now. Yeah.
Have you adjusted to isolation?
Time is irrelevant, isn't it? Time is just an invention and
Exactly.
all, metaphysical. Just
I don't even know what day it is. We're getting loads of bank holidays, and yet we should be saving these for the end of the year. We should just defer them or something.
I keep missing the bin. I keep missing the bins. I turn around and no, it's 2 days ago they're supposed to be put out. So the bins are building up out here in the garden.
Same. Phil is also here. Phil, how are things?
Good, yeah. You got to get a text alert set up for the bins.
Yeah, well, my guy's not that. He's not that sophisticated. Just a lad that calls around and collects them, and he's sound old fella.
Phil, more so than most people I know, you have an insatiable appetite for live sport. So what are you doing to substitute that?
I don't have a substitute. Like I started watching the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, right? And because people would say, would you watch documentaries or would you read books? And I actually haven't really been doing any of that because, yeah, live sport is the thing, like the unpredictable. That's what I love about live sport, not knowing what's going to happen. And yeah, my days are just kind of lost without it. So obviously I'm still doing my regular shift Monday to Friday. So I have no problem with the days of the week because that's keeping me kind of in touch with what day of the week, even what dates it is. Because if I'm saving audio, I'm saving it with dates or whatever. But then when I finish at 2:00, it's like I'm literally just going for a walk, going for a run. The weather's been brilliant. I'm not far from the seaside. It's the 2 kilometers, like it gets me to the seaside. So myself and my wife are walking a lot. The dog has gone to elite levels of fitness. She's probably thinking I preferred being on the couch, but she is as fit as a fiddle now.
She could probably do 15 rounds the way this is going.
Oh yeah, definitely. She'd be ready for the championship rounds anyway.
The thing about The Last Dance, you mentioned it's documentary, but because of the way it's happening, and it feels like live sport because everyone's talking about it week on week. So have you enjoyed it so far?
Oh yeah, and obviously growing up, like basketball, like we obviously would have played a bit of basketball in school, but never had. I was always actually there's a family across the road, and they have the basketball ring set up outside the house, and watching the Jordan documentary, thinking, geez, I'd love to just go over and just even for 3 hours just
dunk on one of the kids.
Well, I need a trampoline to get the proper dunk, but just even have a few goals on the free throw line. But yeah, no, it is quality, and obviously I was aware of how good Michael Jordan was, but it's not really until you see the footage again you realize, like, just unbelievable. And I just love his appetite and his drive to be the best. And if anyone said anything bad about him, he would use that to, like, basically go out the next night and ridicule them and humiliate them. So, like, and sometimes he made it up just to give him that extra drive, where there'd be stories going around, this guy said this to me, that's why I played so well. But it turns out that they didn't say it. He just made it up to kind of sharpen his focus. But the little gap in between when he gives up and he starts playing baseball and retraining to...
Right, spoiler alert.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Well, look, see, that's the thing. We know what happens.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We know what happens.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Cover yourself up.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it is. It's quality, yeah.
Phil got journalistic disclosure for these episodes. This is the way TV reviewers, Andy, they get these kind of things. But
well, how many episodes have you guys watched?
Well, by the time this goes, I think this Monday, this coming week, there's 2 more coming out. So we'll be up to 6.
Yeah. Up to now, yeah. It's inspirational, though. It is inspirational. It's motivating, and, like, I don't want to compare myself to Michael Jordan, but, like, that kind of stuff. No, it's like,
that's a great sentence.
It reminded me of when I was younger. That kind of having that drive, that kind of that single-mindedness, and then you watch it and you have these resolutions like, that's it now. I'm going to get back to it. I'm going to not in this competitive way, just training, fitness, diet, and then go to bed that night with all this, New resolve, and then you wake up the next day and you have a fry up and you're back in lockup. So
Yeah,
gotta keep the Michael Jordan spirit.
Like, I just can't get over how pretty much all the footage of him, he's always got a cigar in his hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
this is life now. His eyes look very red. He's very bloodshot.
Yeah,
now.
but no, even like when he was in his prime, he was always smoking a cigar. The footage and how much footage they have and the access, that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and that it was held to this time. You know, it hasn't been seen before. It's
brilliant.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's unprecedented, the access, the fact that like it's like cameras being there for Saipan, because this was like the Bulls breaking up and everyone knew they were breaking up, and yet they granted cameras to come in, and it would just never happen now.
Can you make a case for this, Jerry? I haven't been watching your review of the show, but
all right, Andy.
Is anyone making a case for the guy?
Make a case for your show.
Is anyone making a case for that guy Jerry? What's his name?
Jerry Krause.
Yeah, is anyone making a case, like being sympathetic towards him?
Well, see, Jerry Reinsdorf is getting a free pass here. I don't know about the later episodes, Phil, but in the first four, Jerry Reinsdorf, he was the owner of the Bulls. So ultimately, the buck stops with him. And if he wanted Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson to stay, he would have told Jerry Krause, here, what are you doing? But he obviously didn't want to pay the lads. He didn't want to pay Jordan. He didn't want to pay Pippen. And he didn't want to pay Jackson. Jerry Krause wanted more credit than he probably deserved, but I think he's getting a bit of a hard time. Plus, he's no longer with us, so he can't defend himself. Everyone else is able to say their piece, you know. Well, like I want to ask you about because I love the Pistons. I love that Bad Boys team, and you obviously a man of Detroit, and you know the culture that was existing in that city. So, to what extent did those teams represent the overall Detroit ethic?
Definitely, yeah, it was huge. I think they both fed into each other. The Bad Boys, the image of Detroit Pistons, and the city itself. I think they lended themselves to each other in terms of, it was a representation of the people of Detroit, blue-collared, hard-working, tough in your face. If they like you, they like you. If they don't like you, they let you know about it. And they were still talking when I was there. Like it was years later, but they were still talking about that team. And Detroit Pistons had a good team while I was there too. They had Chauncey Billups and a few of the big shot, Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups, a few of the good players. So I was at a few games at the Palace and Auburn Hills. And they still, it was like, that was a great time for Detroit, you know. Back when Kronk was on top of the world and the Pistons were winning everything.
It's a funny one because even non-basketball fans will know the names like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan. Those three teams are iconic. And yet the Pistons won 2 championships in the middle of all of that when those players were in their primes. It's kind of like someone made the analogy, and it's a good one, Larry Holmes, who was world champion after Muhammad Ali for years. But he doesn't quite get the same respect because he came after Ali. Like, it's unfortunate timing, but kind of.
Yeah. It is like, you know, when you watch, like, you just remind of what a great game it is, isn't it? When you're seeing it played like that. And even after, like, we're going to YouTube chips, watching, like, Allen Iverson highlights and things like that. It's just...
Yeah. It was a lot more game. It was a lot more physical back then as well, I suppose. We're going to be talking about another classic fight today. And as Phil has said in previous shows, boxing doesn't really change that much, whereas in basketball 20 years ago, 10 years ago, there was a lot more physicality. Now it's more 3-point shots and finesse and this kind of stuff. So that's one thing that differentiates boxing from most sports. Not much boxing news to talk about, but everyone's always talking about Fury and Wilder and Fury and Joshua, Andy. So a lot of conflicting reports coming from different quarters here. But have you got any inside track on what's actually happening there?
I spoke to Tyson during the weekend. He said he doesn't know. There's like his own personal feelings that nothing will happen until there's even talk of a fight behind closed doors, but he doesn't feel it. His own personal feelings that there won't be anything happen until this is over. And he just said there's been nothing really, that they're looking at maybe November for Wilder. But since we spoke, there's been strong rumors or sources saying that Joshua, his side, have been talking to the Fury side, so that's maybe a new development. But I think whatever my own feeling is that whatever fights were even signed and confirmed before this virus, and now up in the air. And I think it's like it's not. I think everything's back in play. I don't see anything being like nailed in stone or set. You know, although there are contracts, they're outdated now. So I don't know if they'll hold up. The only one would be Pulev having a mandatory, you know, and that kind of thing would hold up. But it's all up in the air, isn't it? No one really knows what's going to happen. I think in the next couple of weeks you might see some way. Yeah, well, I think we'll know which way it's going to go. If it is going to be fights behind closed doors, Eddie Hearn's been hinting at it.
That's mad to think of that. Though.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
but
first of all, you're obviously going to hear all the prompting from the corners. But could you imagine Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder? Could you imagine you could hear Tyson Fury talking to Wilder?
Yeah, but it'll have to. Well, a lot of fighters do talk to each other. It'll have to be, and if there is no crowd, it'll be. Maybe it'll be a good tactic for a fight if there's no audience there.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it will never. These fights behind closed doors will all have to be smaller fights in terms of the purses and the money that's required to make them, because all those big fighters will require a live gate, and you know, even though pay-per-view probably generate a lot, there's still a lot to be said for the live gate of a fight.
Because I know the UFC are going ahead with Fight Island idea. They actually have a pay-per-view lined up for this month. And as you said, the pay-per-view buys are going to be off the charts. I'm sure if there's no other sport on, non-fight fans will throw some money at this because they want to see something. So I think imagine if they took Fury and Wilder to Saudi Arabia or whatever and did it behind closed doors and charged whatever they wanted for the pay-per-view, like it would do serious business. And as Phil said, the entertainment value, if you just mic'd up the two fighters, like the big dosters getting thrown around and all this kind of stuff. So I think there is some appeal there. But just from your perspective, if all cards were off the table and you had your choice, would you prefer a fight with Joshua because you've already done the Wilder thing, or would you like to get back in there with Wilder again?
I think I actually have no say in the matter anyway. From a coaching point of view, you just prepare for the challenge that's there. They both present different challenges. I think Wilder will be a lot better. We're going to go on to talk about a fight now, which Joe Goossen coached massively. And there's been talk that Joe Goossen is going to now coach Wilder. So that would be a new challenge and an interesting development, and an interesting subplot to the fight. But whoever it is, you just prepare for them, and it doesn't really matter. I think Tyson beats them both anyway, so just a matter of how it's matter, just a matter of which way he goes about it. And it doesn't really matter who it is, to me.
And not to labour the point, but you mentioned Wilder has been speaking a bit, and he mentioned that he had a bicep injury during this fight, and obviously we talked a few months ago about the 40-pound costume nonsense. So do you pay much heed to any of that stuff, or have you parked it all?
I don't pay much attention to it, but some of it I felt like it's good to see him say. Like, I know it reflects badly on him, but at least he's shown that he has a fighter spirit. That he has that kind of. He's a little bit slightly delusional, or whatever it is, that he has to believe in something that it wasn't him in there. That Tyson didn't do that to him. That there was some other external problem or internal problem that caused him to lose that way. So it shows that, and it shows that he has that kind of hardened spirit that he still wants to win in the mind of a champion. But there might be some credence to it, because I've only watched the fight maybe 3 times now, or 4 times, and his legs just fall apart. He completely fell apart, and he just came apart, it seems like. So there might be something to it. I was surprised how quickly he unraveled in the fight.
It's interesting you mentioned Joe Goossen and his flashy wardrobe. We'll get to him in depth in a few minutes, but Phil, I wonder, I'm always skeptical when fighters change coaches after a loss, because it's kind of implying that they're passing the buck a little bit, that it wasn't my fault the coach got the tactics wrong. And Wilder was obviously very quick after that fight to put the blame on Mark Breeden for throwing the towel in. Like, what are your thoughts on that and just the Wilder Fury story?
Well, the thing is, if Wilder was to change and go with Joe Goossen and then was to beat Tyson Fury, then it's seen as a masterstroke. But if he goes out and loses again, then Deontay Wilder, all the finger of blame is pointed at him. But I know we've talked about it in the past. Yeah, sometimes you'll get, whether it's a coach change. Maybe somebody would go up a weight because I think the weight didn't suit me. That was my the last time I struggled with the weight, so they go up. They'll find different ways, and it is probably a psychology thing that Andy kind of touched on there, where fighters are looking for the positive. So Deontay Wilder thinks, if I get a new trainer, yeah, I can beat Tyson Fury. Where other fighters would think, yeah, if I change weight, I can become world champion in that weight division. The other weight didn't suit me. I wasn't as strong. So they'll always look for little things. And, you know, at the moment, people might think that Wilder's making excuses, but if it works out for him, then, you know, he'll get all the plaudits, and obviously the change of coach would. But if not, then it'll be just seen as it was an attempt to try and mastermind a win over a guy that has had his number twice. Obviously, the first one was a draw. It was controversial. Most people felt Fury won it, but there was no doubt about the second fight. But it's hard to imagine that Wilder is going to cause huge problems for Fury. But with the right hand, he's always got that puncher's chance. But I'm sure, Andy, if the fight was happening again, you'd be wondering what approach they would use. Obviously, see, as well, like a change of coach gets Andy and Sugar Hill guessing a bit. Maybe what will they do? You know, how will they do it?
It's how much can you do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like sometimes changing coach can, in the short term, can have a really detrimental effect because you're making an adjustment. You're learning new things you're not comfortable with, and it can affect your confidence because you're not able to execute those things. And it might play out in his favor that if he goes with Joe Goossen, I think what they were suggesting is that he'd stay with JD's and Mark Breeden, but also bring Goossen as another set of eyes. But if whatever happens, Tyson does fight Joshua, and then in the meantime he can have a couple of tune-up fights with Joe Goossen in the camp, he will definitely make improvements with Joe Goossen there. There's no doubt about it. So we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully some of that will come together before the end of the year and we can see these fights. You mentioned that fights unlikely to happen or maybe will fall by the wayside because of this pandemic. Dillian White against Povetkin was supposed to happen, would have happened last night, but I can't see that fight happening now, and there's a lot of talk about Dillian White fighting behind closed doors. He's up for it, and Andy Ruiz has been mentioned as the opponent for that. So we weren't too impressed with Andy Ruiz the way he turned up against Joshua for the rematch. But Andy, if those two were in peak physical condition, what do you think of that matchup? Who would you favour there?
It's a really interesting fight. I just like it's very hard to have any faith in Andy Ruiz after that performance against Joshua. I don't think he'll ever be as hungry as he was that night. He beat Joshua the first time. And I don't know, Dillian White is to me, is the best fighter not to fight for world title yet. You know, outside of the big three, he might even be better than Wilder. Who knows? So he's to me, Dillian White's one of the top heavyweights out there, and I'd favour him to beat Ruiz.
Phil, what do you reckon?
Well, I don't think isolation would be too kind to Andy Ruiz, because if he was struggling motivation-wise for training, you know, if you don't have that access at the moment, it really all falls down to you. It's all on you, and he's shown in the past that he hasn't been willing to put the work in. So you'd imagine that the best version of Andy Ruiz is an Andy Ruiz that has a proper camp and isn't fighting behind closed doors. And
the problem is with these fights behind closed doors is that we're in a pandemic, and you're asking medical staff to come to oversee a boxing match. It's totally unnecessary. You know, It's purely for entertainment. So until it completely drops off to where hospital's not overrun, and medical staff are more freed up. That's I can't see it happen until then, because even if they will do it and you'll pay for it, on a moral level, it just doesn't seem right to be asking, you know, ambulance and doctors and physicians to come and watch two guys fight when there's people dying. So Sorry to be a downer, but that's it.
I couldn't agree more. Like even the Premier League in isolation feeling the need to sort of rush the football back when seemingly every other league has looked at it and said, let's just leave it for a couple of months.
It's Phil, isn't it? Phil and the Liverpool fans. They all...
No. Sure, they're going to give Liverpool the title. It'd be grand. That's a given. But actually,
you don't really win it, do you?
Well, you just have to go on and win it next. But see, even they're talking about, you mentioned the rush to finish a season, say for the Premier League, for example, to finish this season as if they're going to start next season on time. Like that looks really far away at the moment as well. So my feeling has always been, why not try and finish a season that has 9 or 10 games left rather than cancel a season that has got so much played? Then like surely you can cancel a season that hasn't happened yet. That's a lot easier. And then people say, oh, what about contracts for TV? You put them down, you basically move the goalposts a year or a season down the road. But yeah, like it's all very uncertain at the moment. But I definitely would agree with you, Andy, that it does seem strange talking about sport while this is going on. But then sport has a way of moving quickly, as in a heavyweight fight could get announced, be behind closed doors, you'd be thinking, I'm not really in favour of this. And then roll on to the night that it's happening. There you are, screaming at the TV, and you're into it. And then you're like, oh, I missed this.
Yeah. But like the boxing calendar, unlike football and most sports, is formatted in such a way where it's always a blank canvas. Like these fights are just put together sort of ad lib anyway. And last night we were going to have a face to boxing, Canelo against Saunders. Again,
what a fight. Canelo he can't believe he got the decision again.
I don't think that fight's going to happen because apparently the Golovkin fight is agreed already. So I think those two will just get in the ring in September if possible, and Saunders is going to lose out there. Like White Povetkin, we mentioned. Katie Taylor against Amanda Serrano, that was going to be her fight of her career so far probably. And again, like it took so long to get that fight made that you have to wonder, is it going to fall apart again?
You can't have that. You can't really have that behind closed doors because it's a money fight for both of them. You know.
Exactly. And you were supposed to have, in an ideal world, Jason Quigley was supposed to fight Jack Cullen. So you would have been in Manchester last night, Andy.
I've been there, yeah.
How are the boys keeping? Have you been in touch? Have you got them on a strict training regime?
No, the Paddy's working with his dad. His dad's trained him a lot, so I'm very fortunate that his dad can coach him, and they're training a lot. And Paddy's in great shape, but he's just got no fight to train for. Jason's training on his own in Donegal. He sends me his videos. I correct the mistakes, but I do him like a video review, really, basically with his training. And that's all we do. They're staying fit, they're staying sharp, and they're just waiting. And like, whenever there is fights, they'll be ready to go. Jason's eager to fight, even if it's behind closed doors. He'll be eager to fight Cullen. So we'll just wait and see.
Yeah, and hopefully we see that soon. For now, it's time to dip back into the archives to relive what Bert Sugar, no less, described as the greatest fight of all time. This is Jose Luis Castillo against Diego Corrales.
The WBC WBO unification lightweight title fight. Oh, what a left hook by Castillo, and Corrales is down. The mouthpiece comes out.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Come to me. You all right? You want to continue? Okay, here we go. Time. Come here.
They get the mouthpiece back. He was up at 8.
Put it in. There you go. Let's go. Here we go.
Joe Goossen trying to get involved. What a dramatic moment here in round 10 as Corrales hits the canvas. Castillo looking to finish it here. He goes down again. Takes the mouthpiece out.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Come here. You all right? I'm gonna penalize you. Taking 1 point off. Time. 1 point off here. 1 point off. 1 point.
Excessive spitting out of the mouthpiece. A point deducted.
Come on. You're spitting out the mouthpiece.
To make matters even worse now, in a
fucking get inside on him now.
Dreadful round for Corrales. Down 2 times here in the 10th. Again, Castillo going back to work. And if Corrales can get through this round, the dynamic of the fight has now changed to the point where he may very well need a knockout. With 1:35 to go, he's got a long way to go, Corrales. But he just hurt Castillo with the right hand, or at least pushed him back. That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back, a straight right, and now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Ebb and flow. They're all standing here, Mandalay Bay. Corrales coming back after being on the canvas twice here in the 10th. Now Castillo steps back. Corrales winging. Castillo's in trouble. Weeks steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable, dramatic turnaround to win this fight. Unbelievable.
There you have it, the dramatic final round of a quite brilliant world title unification between Jose Luis Castillo and Diego Corrales. Almost 15 years to the day, Cinco de Mayo weekend 2005, and it more than fit the occasion. We'll go to you first, Phil. We'll probably get into the specifics of this fight as we go here, but just in terms of your top line thoughts, did you enjoy watching this one?
It was brilliant. Yeah, I take back what I said about, I think boxing is one of those ones though where you can look back at fights and it's not like watching back at 90 minutes of a football match where you know the result from years ago, where I knew how good this fight was, but even watching it back and how it finishes is unbelievable. Like, the odds are stacked against Corrales. Like, there's no way out. Not even Sam Beckett quantum leaping in can save him in this. And he does. It's unbelievable. Like I thought
you were going to say Samuel Beckett wrote him in a play or something.
No. I hope you watched Quantum Leap. Am I showing my age? There's probably people that didn't watch Quantum Leap.
It's a classic.
One of the rare shows that hasn't actually been remade, thank God. But yeah, just the way it finishes. I'm watching it again, and I almost got goosebumps watching it because it just shouldn't have happened the way it did. But some real good, quick thinking as well from Corrales with the mouthpiece as well. I'm sure we'll go into that in more detail. But yeah, like the build up to a fight, and they say this is what's going to happen, and that didn't happen. It was the classic phone booth fight where two lads just leaning on each other. I thought Tony Weeks, the referee, did a great job. He just let it go because obviously he didn't do the rematch. Now I know the rematch didn't go as long, but it really shows the importance of having a good referee. And Tony Weeks did a top job, obviously.
Yeah, we'll get to Weeks as well, and Joe Goossen. There's lots of key characters in this one. Andy, I know you love a good classic fight. Did this get the blood pumping where you're like, I want to jump back in there and do some sparring?
Yeah, no, but like in the absence of live sport, I'd watched this fight when it happened, and I hadn't watched it since. It's always referred as a classic. Highlights pop up every now and then. This is actually the first time since it actually happened that I sat down and watched the whole fight, and I'd forgotten how it ended. And when he gets a stoppage, and I jumped up. I was actually watching it in bed, and it was like you just got those goosebumps.
Did you remember
it down in my nose? Like,
did you remember who won?
Like, oh my god! Yeah, I know. I didn't know. I knew it was possible. I didn't remember the results, so it was just like it was just a thrilling fight.
Oh, amazing!
And yeah, like I actually don't enjoy those. I admire them because of what they're doing in the ring. All that they're showing internally. But I just don't. I actually don't like those fights because, there was skill. There was a certain amount of skill, but it wasn't the highest level of skill in terms of the slick. But like, there's been a lot of fights where you look at, say, you watch Roberto Duran inside the fight. That's pure skill. He can fight inside the post. So these guys are just basically head on each other's chests and just banging each other, And I actually don't like. I admire the men, but I actually don't admire those fights. But the ending was phenomenal. It was like, I can't remember the line Al Bernstein said, but it's like probably the most dramatic comeback win in a round in history, and it could be like I like it was sensational. It looks like it's over, and he comes back and stops him.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, we'd probably spend 90% of this, talking about the 10th round, but just to set the context for people.
Did you guys score the fight round per round?
Oh Jesus, I gave up on that after a couple of rounds. I was like, I can't even make out who's landing what here. But like the lads would be, Al Bernstein would be like, oh, good left hook by Corrales, and then Castillo's landing 3 punches in the middle of it. So
I was just interested to see how you guys scored round 8.
Oh,
did you look at it? Round 8 was sensational, like.
Yeah, we'll get to round 8 as well. But just the pre-context for this, as you said, like most people probably haven't even seen this fight before now, and a lot of people definitely haven't watched it since it happened. So this wasn't just the world title unification. This was the cream of the division, really, because Floyd Mayweather had by this stage moved up in weight. So these were the heirs to the throne, basically. In fact, many actually thought Castillo defeated Floyd when the pair met in 2002. Fast forward to 2005, and Castillo was the Ring Magazine champion and also the holder of the WBC title. Corrales was the WBO belt holder, a prize he ripped from then undefeated Freitas in blistering fashion. People should look that up as well. As with Castillo, Mayweather was a defining name on Corrales' resume, their 2001 meeting considered by many to be Floyd's best ever performance. It would also prove to be a critical juncture in Corrales' career, the fallout from that showing eventually sparking a split with then coach Ray Woods. Joe Goossen eventually assumed the reins, but not before guiding Joel Casamayor to a victory over Corrales in 2003. By the time those two rematched a year later, Goossen had swapped corners and would become a firm fixture in Corrales' story. As we've already said, lads, Goossen will be a big topic as we go through this fight, not least his shirt. But Andy, broadly speaking, I mentioned the Mayweather link there, but these two were very good fighters in their own right. Do you recall there being much buzz around this fight? Because everyone in boxing would have known it's going to be a good clash, but it didn't have any mainstream publicity.
It was just before like I really went to America, so I don't remember there being much buzz, but you could tell that insiders knew, because you take one look at ringside. That like I love the one thing I love about these old fights, looking who you can see at ringside. You got Bob Arum, Tom DeBuff, Gary Shaw, Adi Palula, Eric Gomez. You got all the fighters: Jeff Lacey, Shane Mosley, Winky Wright, James Toney, and like the list goes on. And they're excited. They're like fans watching this fight, and they're eager. Chavez Senior, Chavez Junior, and it's like, So I think internally, there's fights with purists, trade fights, whatever. Yeah. And then there's these big blockbuster fights that don't always live up to hype. But I think people knew when this fight was made, it was going to be what it turned out to be, which was a firecracker.
And it's interesting because it was in Cinco de Mayo weekend in Vegas, and the night before was the awards dinner. So apparently a lot of the fighters just booked an extra night in the hotel so they could stay and watch this fight. And like Chavez was a former, I think Castillo sort of made his name as a sparring partner for Chavez Senior. So this is it was kind of a nice thing that he was there ringside cheering him on. But just on Castillo, Andy, do you think he beat Mayweather? Have you watched that fight closely at all? Or
that's another one for a review. It's too long ago in my memory to say anything definitive, you know.
Because people say De La Hoya beat Mayweather, but if anyone watches that fight back, he definitely didn't. But like Castillo, I think you can make a case that he won 6 rounds anyway. So it probably is one worth revisiting. Round 10, Phil, I think we'll set that aside for a few minutes' time. But just broadly speaking, in terms of how this fight sort of started and the tactics around it, what did you think of the first couple of rounds?
Yeah, well, like the narrative going into the fight is that Corrales is going to try and fight on the outside, use the jab, and within the first 30 seconds, I think Al Bernstein pretty much says like, yeah, this is going to be as good. This is going to be better than I thought it was going to be. And they're just basically trying to land that left hook. Who can land it first? Throughout the fight as well, there was a lot of borderline low blows, but actually very few of them were called. It wasn't until later in the fight where Tony Weeks pulled up Castillo on one and said there was a couple of low ones there, but there had definitely been lower ones.
And the thing about it as well is that Corrales' shots were very low.
Yeah.
I don't, most fighters will have their shots up high. He has a long torso anyway, but like, yeah, you were saying, they were considerably low, considering his shots were low. His belt was actually on his belt line, whereas most fighters, their belt line is up on the tummy.
Yeah, and even as good a fight as it was, and the buzz on the night, there was actually a lot of empty seats if you looked around. And Cinco de Mayo, and wouldn't have fancied sitting behind Chavez Jr. because he pretty much spent the whole fight on his feet. So you'd be kind of having to look around him to see. He was getting pretty excited. But it just turned into the war. It was pretty evident from early on. And I mean, I don't know what you think, Andy. If watching it back, if the fight had been stopped in the 10th round and Castillo had won it, surely Joe Goossen and Corrales would get absolutely slated for their tactics.
No, I don't know. Had Tony Weeks waited off when he took the mouthpiece out of his own mouth. That's. Did
you hear him after the fight? He said, "I was trying to hold on to it, but the gloves, the grip isn't great, so it just fell on the ground."
Yeah, so I would say Tony Weeks would have been totally justified. I know him would have complained or bat an eyelid, but we would have been deprived of a sensational comeback. And no, I don't think they would have been. Sometimes you can have a plan, and I don't know if their plan was it seems like their plan actually was to stand in and fight.
Mm. Oh yeah, because Goossen said it. Yeah, he said it plenty of times.
Yeah, sometimes you have that plan of, well, look, sometimes as a coach you have to adjust as well, because you can see that it's not suitable for. You might have a plan to stay on the outside and box, but when you get in there, it's apparent that you have to stay inside because you don't feel comfortable when you're on the outside. And then as a coach, if you can see that and you agree with your fighter or whatever, you might have to say, well, I have to adjust as well. So put your head on his chest, because as Joe Goossen says at one stage, Castillo was catching with the uppercut all the time on the inside. So he says he's catching with the uppercut. So when you go to the body, also come back with a hook to the head, and that way it will nullify his hook. So maybe he made an adjustment. I'm not sure if that would have been the plan going into it, but it became the plan. So they might have got slated down the line, but I don't think anyone could argue because it was such a back and forth fight.
No, Goossen did a very good piece with Kieran Mulvaney. People should check it out. Basically saying that they basically second guessed the Castillo camp, and they predicted that Castillo thought Corrales was coming to box. But Goossen, who was relatively new to the Corrales camp, basically looked at all of Corrales' fights. He's not great on the back foot. He looked at Floyd Mayweather, maybe the best back foot fighter of the last 40 years, who struggled to get away from Castillo. He's like, we just have to go and meet this guy head on. And it was actually an ingenious tactic, because Castillo, even from a stamina point of view, was probably preparing to walk a guy down. And in retrospect, or as soon as the bell went, Corrales was right in front of him. So it probably caught him on the hop. It took him a while to get going.
Certainly, yeah. When you're preparing for a fight, when you got sparring partners who are moving, you would have been anticipating that Corrales was going to move, so you would have brought in sparring partners who were going to box and move, and then he's meeting your face, chest to chest, and it's a different conditioning. No, it's good. Joe Goossen is you watch this fight and you see a great corner in it. Not only that, he did mention in the build of this fight that he sparred something like 26 rounds one day. So that would tell you that they were preparing for this type of fight, that this was their tactic, that they were going to meet him head on. So, you witness a great cornerman at his job when you see Joe Goossen in this fight. Yeah.
Do you think he's underrated as a coach?
Yeah, he's got several world champions, so he's still a broadcaster with PBC. So I think he's fairly well rated. Just the amount of cool and calmness when he obviously there's under serious pressure, especially with halfway through the fight, cuts and a big swelling on Corrales' eye, and he's calmly speaking to the doctor he's communicating to Corrales, and it's really, really, and the one thing after the second knockdown when Corrales takes out his mouthpiece, obviously Corrales is smart, takes his knee, then there's more time for him to recuperate while they're replacing the mouthpiece, and Goossen actually goes down the steps to rinse out the mouthpiece. The first time he pops in the mouthpiece straight away to rinse the mouthpiece, comes back to him, and he says to him, really calm, with a raised eyes, excuse me for swearing.
No, go for it.
But he says, you better fucking get inside of him now, And it was a real cool line. You know?
It was. It was like
Hollywood
something from
stuff,
yeah, it was.
It was.
Yeah.
Totally cinematic. But it was brave tactics from Corrales as much as anyone, because Castillo has never been down, or had never been down, didn't go down in this fight. And Corrales himself had been shown against Mayweather. He was down 5 times against Mayweather. So he was stepping into the eye of the storm there. It was brave from him too. And it reminded me a bit of Gatti against Ward, where Gatti started boxing on the back foot, like moving, and then like ultimately you're going to revert to type. And Corrales, even from the start of this fight, he was never going to box. He was always going to bite down and fight. So I thought that was good. But Andy, mentioning the surprise and tactics, did you ever have that in your career where you felt you surprised your opponent or your opponent surprised you?
No, I always played the type, I guess. But no, I had it a few times because I was such a counterpuncher, and the fighters who would have been aggressive all their careers come out and try to box you or counterpunch me. And sometimes it catches you off guard, but sometimes you're actually loving it because you're prepared for such an uptight, like on your back foot, running, and trying to counter. And then you got all this time in the world. I mean, just like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah, it was a bit like you obviously went about it a very different way, but the Wilder Fury thing, where even though you were saying you were coming to fight him, everyone just assumed that wasn't true. And then ultimately, when it did happen, he probably caught in the hop a little bit. So, in terms of the pattern of the fight, like we should probably get to round 10, but the middle rounds kind of developed a little bit of a pattern. Like you said, it wasn't high level, but not in a certain way. No, I know what you mean. Yeah. I know what you mean. But like for like Ward Gaddy, for example, I'm probably going to mention that again. But that fight, it felt like a level up from that one, where there seemed to be a little bit more intricacy about how they were picking their punches on the inside. You know. So
definitely. No, it was definitely more. It wasn't just a slugfest. There was definitely like. There was craft behind it, you know, behind the grit. There was definitely craft, and there was skill. And the reason Castillo was able to get those 2 knockouts, or the first knockdown anyway, was because he was going to the body with the left hook all night, and then he feints, goes left with the body, and then turns to the chin. It's like Sugar Ray Robinson against Cameron Basilio. It's the exact same punch, and it's a punch that you see now from most Mexican fighters, but especially Canelo throws it a lot. He'll keep throwing that hook to the body, and then all of a sudden it's down and on your chin.
And I know that's really interesting, but I know it's premeditated. But do you think, and you know from experience, but are they able to turn that in like mid-air almost, where they see the opening to go to the chin and they kind of pivot just as they're throwing the shot, or do they know they're
sometimes, going? Yeah, they know. Sometimes they know they're going to do it. Sometimes they might pivot, but you won't get the same leverage because you always have to stop your motion. You can go down, and then it's a different. It's to turn it up. It's a second. Whereas if you just make it one swing of movement, you get more leverage.
It was class, and Al Bernstein said a clinic in infighting, and for Corrales, like Castillo was kind of built blocky. And you can see why he liked to fight inside, and apparently he was a nightmare to fight on the inside. But for someone like you or Corrales with long arms, was it difficult to get your shots away when you're kind of up chest to chest?
Yeah, and that's one thing about Corrales. For such a tall, long fighter, you could see how. And then one time in the fight, not short rounders, he lands like a peach of a short right, but it's only like it's literally. It is hard to throw shorter shots with long arms. It's very hard, especially when they're not hooks. If you want to hooks are easy because you can turn them, but straight shots. But Corrales was very effective at it.
No, he was great. And it drives me mad when I see Callum Smith fighting as an inside fighter when he's probably got the longest arms in the division. But I suppose he's kind of entrenched in that now. Bill, you mentioned Tony Weeks already, and you've done plenty of these classic game clubs in other sports, and Owen Sheehan has your secret man of the match. And even though there's only 3 people in the ring, I think Tony Weeks deserves a big mention here, because if there's any other referee, I don't think this goes down as a classic, because he jumps in maybe a handful of times throughout the whole fight.
Yeah, also as well, because he's big Tony Weeks, he can just tell the fighters to split up, and they'll listen to him. Obviously,
in Spanish too.
Yeah, exactly. We're laughing about that, but that obviously is a big factor as well, that you can communicate efficiently with both fighters, and you know, he doesn't have to get in and get his hands dirty. And then when, like, you know, the 10th round, was it controversial that he didn't? Would he have been within his rights to disqualify Corrales for the blatant second throwing out?
Had he established it earlier in the fight where he was 1-1 and throughout the fight?
Yeah.
But I think no, it would have been a sin. It would have been like to stop a fight of that quality back and forth like that. You couldn't really to stop it for disqualification for a low blow when they were both actually doing it. You know, it wasn't. It was a rough and tumble fight. It wasn't like there was one fighter doing it all night. They were both at it.
Yeah. Yeah, but even the I'm talking about the second mouthpiece. Like
had he stopped Corrales? Yeah. Not even. I'm not sure if you were disqualification, but had he just stopped him? Because it's a sign that you're finished. Yeah. Like that. You know, I'm done. Take my applause. I'm done. So, no, he would have been totally within his rights.
Yeah. And you mentioned round 8, Andy, and I think if round 10 didn't happen, round 8 probably would have been round of the year because it was unbelievable. So a left hook at the end of round 7 if people want to go back and check it. So Castillo's knees are gone. Like Corrales nails him with a lovely left hook, and Corrales himself had been hurt in that round. Castillo goes back with cuts, and he'd been stopped on cuts plenty. So going out into the 8th round, he knew, Jesus, I better maybe step on the gas here and try and get stuck in. And that made for just this unbelievable round 8.
Yeah, and like it was unbelievable. And like he knew because I was starting to swell, and he'd been like he arguably lost the 2 rounds previous to that. So like Joe Goossen says now's your time. Get out there and get him, you know, and
it's about balls. It's about balls.
Yeah, it's all about that. So, you know, as a coach, you have these phrases or whatever it is that you know what your fighter will respond to, and I think that must have been one of their things. And he did. Like, it was a sensational round, sensational.
And now round 10, which, like, we'll probably talk about how round 10 affects how people look back at this fight in general, but we mentioned Weeks and his role in this. So after this, the first knockdown, that's a heavy knockdown. And then the second knockdown, I think Corrales is still hurt from the first knockdown. It's almost like momentum thing.
Yeah, so he said he was still buzzed because it wasn't as strong a left that put him down.
But I wonder, is it's just retrospective? Because I'd always be sort of safety first. Like, I never blame referees for stopping the fight too early. It's always better too early than too late and that kind of thing. But for some reason, I kind of agreed with Weeks that Corrales was still all right. Like, he got up, given out. Like, when Weeks was taking the point off him for taking his gum shield out, Corrales is arguing with him. Like, he's alert. Do you know what I mean? So that showed Weeks that, you know, this guy's still in there. So I think, would you have criticised any referee for stopping that fight after the second knockdown?
Go ahead, Phil.
No, I'm like you could see that it's one thing that is a sign that a fighter's ready to call it where they spit out the mouthpiece. I mean, think back to Joshua and Ruiz, where there was a few times where Joshua just got rid of the mouthpiece and almost signaled, "I'm done here. This, you know, this isn't going to happen for me tonight." So, yeah, and he was slow to put the mouthpiece in. So, you know, that is one of the telltale signs. And obviously, with the first one, he did well to get up, but he only got up on 9, and you know, he could say he was in control. He knew what he was doing, but then obviously he gives himself a bit of time to recover. But
Tony Weeks asked him after the first knockdown, "Do you want to continue?"
Yeah,
you know, so maybe he was thinking then, but I think you do have to take into consideration the previous rounds of the fight that you witnessed, knowing that both guys are in it. Corrales arguably winning the fight at that stage, but just to be caught, and you got to know the history of the fighter too, in terms of he's one of these guys who will go down and come back. Yeah, and I think I benefited from that in my career. That referees knew that I always had a chance, and they would give me the benefit of the doubt, you know, if I was up against it. So I think you got to take it all. Like, even like, you know, there was some, even after the fight, Castillo had some. He was a little bit had some, you know, he had a bit of a gripe with the referee's decision to stop the fight. Yeah. He, in his post-fight speech, he says, you know, he gave Corrales plenty of chances. Why not give me a chance? And a fighter will always say that. I agree with the stoppage. Like one more punch. I don't know because
I think
you don't know.
that last punch.
He was looked indefensible in that moment, but he could have threw a punch. He could have grabbed. You never know. You never know how these things end up. Like, but
it was so brave. Clarity of thinking from Tony Weeks to see one fighter fall twice in the round and still stop the other fighter in the same round. You know, he obviously had a very conclusive thought that he's done, and you trust Weeks with that sort of decision. But Andy, from the coaching point of view, so Joe Goossen's after seeing his guy go down heavily, go down twice, and come over to the corner twice. Like, it must take some trust level, like a mutual thing between the fighter and the coach, where he trusts him to go back out there.
Yeah, I think you got to know your fighter, don't you? You got to know your fighter, like, and
even you mentioned the 20.
I know you'd be considered. Yeah, exactly. You'd be concerned for his safety. 2 knockdowns already, and you send him back out.
Like his left eye is a mess as well.
Yeah. You might say, if Goossen calls it there and then, you know, people would say, "Oh, he probably saved his fight his career."
Yeah.
But it's a unification fight.
Yeah.
It's for all the marbles, and you got to know your fighter. And like I said, I'd be winning the fight up to that point. So, you know what I mean? Yeah. Let him get stopped if he's going to get stopped.
Yeah. But you said earlier that, like, the 26 round sparring, like, Goossen knew what Corrales had put into this camp and what he was able to go through. And I think that almost played into it. What I found most interesting was what he told him to do, rather than, like, you can probably tell us, but your coach is probably going to tell you either go out there and hold, go out there and run, or what Goossen told him was go in there and get stuck in, basically. So, like, that's I don't think many coaches would have been saying that now.
No, I think it's like get on the inside of him. So you sometimes there's safety there, you know, because you're not at the end of the punches. Sometimes you're more safe up close than you are at distance. So maybe that's what he meant. That's how I interpreted it anyway.
What about what it does for Castillo, where he lands obviously a flush punch, puts him down once, puts him down again. He's thinking, I've got this now. And then, you know, the psychology of that he's thinking most of the guys don't get up.
Yeah.
I think he'd be really pissed because he got so much time. Corrales got so much time from being knocked down to actually coming back to resuming and fighting, between the count, taking the knee, finding the gum shield, going down, rinsing it, down the steps, rinsing it, coming back, getting instruction, then. So he must have had maybe 15 seconds, maybe 15 to 18 seconds to recover. And it doesn't sound much, but it makes a difference. But then he was going for the finish, was throwing a huge hook himself and got caught in the midst of doing it, in the act of throwing a punch, and then he got hurt himself. Had been hurt already in the fight from the same punch. So I'm not sure psychologically, because it was so quick, wasn't it? The turnaround was so quick. It's not like it happened over a couple of rounds where you have time to actually register the thought of, okay, I've had this guy down now and he's coming back at me. But the fact that it was just so quick and the stoppage just kind of came. Like, he really, really closed the show well, Corrales, didn't he? Considering he'd been down twice, already exhausted and fatigued from the fight that it was, to come back and stop him.
Yeah.
It was quite an effort to finish him.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point, that psychologically, Castillo must have been thinking much like Wilder against Fury the first night.
Because there was also time for the referee to take a point, because he went around to the judges and saying a point for deliberately taking out the mouthpiece.
But Castillo, I can only imagine, like, when you hit that home run shot and you think that first left hook was beautiful, and he must have thought, that's it now. Even the fact that he got up from that, it's like, oh God, and then put him down again.
In a way, he should have just said, look, 2 knockdowns and a point for mouthpiece. Let me just jab now.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen this fight out and I'm jabbing him. He's done, you know?
It was a bit like, so you can probably tell us about the vulnerability of, sometimes the fighter's probably most susceptible when they're trying to go for a knockout. So when John Jackson had that little bit of success against you, and you walked him on to this unbelievable hook. So Corrales, it wasn't as if he just walked over and it wasn't as if one punch totally changed things. Like, he had to put a combination together to finish that fight. So I just thought it was really impressive. It wasn't as if he turned the tide entirely.
And it's a combination in this fight anyway of the power from the punch, but also the fatigue of the previous rounds, because they were both kind of exhausted and just spent from the effort they'd put in.
Yeah, and the epilogue of this fight, so it's kind of like the Gatti Ward thing again, where I kind of prefer to look at this first fight in isolation, because what came after wasn't quite the same. More so in this case, where the rematch happened 5 months after this one, and this was such a brutal fight that seems like a very quick turnaround. Basically, Gary Shaw and Bob Arum decided we could probably put this on pay-per-view because everyone's talking about it. So they turned it around, had it in September, and it wasn't quite the same kind of fight. Like it ended in 4 rounds. Corrales didn't look himself. So I think the first fight, I think we should probably just remember it for what it was, a classic fight in its own right. And then they were supposed to have a third fight, and Castillo came in way overweight, like 7.5 pounds, and Corrales said no thanks. So they didn't even have the rubber match. So
sometimes for great fights like this, you mentioned Gatti and Ward, I'd also put it in it like Rafael Marquez versus Israel Vasquez. Now that is a high standard of skill as well in that, but just certain styles, they might not be marking names that sell out arenas or get pay-per-view, but you can just make a match of 2 fighters that just perfectly gel, and as fans, you just know that it potentially could be that, and more often than not, those fights, they make for sensational meetings. Like
because similarly, and Phil, you said it earlier that there wasn't a packed out crowd for this, but for the second one there was, and like Gatti Ward won, people knew it was going to be a brilliant fight, but they didn't know it was going to be an all-time classic. And then by the time the second one came around, huge numbers at the gate, huge numbers tuning in. So I think that probably skews things as well. But just in terms of round 10 and how it shapes our memory of this whole fight, so like it's obviously an A+ fight. I'm not going to ask you, do you think it's underrated or overrated? It's a 10 out of 10. But what kind of fight do you think it's remembered as? Say, for example, the referee does stop it after Corrales is knocked down and Castillo's named the winner. Do we still remember this as a great fight, or does it need that round 10 to really put it over the top?
No, I think you do need the 10th round, because it's an A fight. It becomes A+ because of the 10th round. Because, as I said earlier on, there's no way Corrales, like you're as I say, you're just in a position with, right, he's after getting knocked down twice, point deducted. That's completely changed the scorecards now. His left eye is almost completely closed. How is he going to get out of this? This is not a sticky situation. It's almost mission impossible. And it wasn't one punch. It was a few punches. Where does he get the energy to do that and then just finish it off? Because I think that the stoppage was perfectly fine, because the ropes are holding him up. He's like a rag doll. That's actually what was referenced in commentary, that he was like a rag doll with that last punch. He was so vulnerable that Tony Weeks didn't have much choice but to stop the fight. But I think, given what happened in the 10th round, that's what makes it. That's why it makes it so good. The fact that even I was a bit like yourself, Andy, where I obviously remembered the fight, and I remember it being a great fight, but I kind of had forgotten. For some reason, I had in my head it went another round, and I was even thinking, let's just go to the scorecards, or what? But I completely forgot about how Corrales just pulls out of the back. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, like it was cinematic almost. How, like, even when he wins, he walks off so coolly. Like, I can imagine if that was me, I would have been jumping all over the place. But Corrales he just strolls away as if
in the post-fight thing, like, he's so exhausted. He's like, Gary Shaw's just like, just lean on me. And he's just like leaning, like he's just like collapsed kind of on him, like pretending that they're hugging and celebrating, but it's actually he's just trying to take a bit of a rest.
So just the final word on it, lads. Like, the tragedy of all this, obviously, Corrales passed away on the 2-year anniversary of this fight, which is quite poignant. But neither him nor Castillo are in the Hall of Fame, and I think that's a little bit unfortunate. I think they've probably built up enough. Even Castillo, like, his career, having pushed Mayweather so close, loads of world titles. Corrales was brilliant at the lower weights, very good lightweight as well. So I think that probably ultimately they will get into the Hall of Fame. But Andy, just from your perspective, having watched this fight back and just thought about these guys for a couple of days, like, where do you stack it up in boxing history? Because this probably stacks up with any fight.
Yeah, it's up there. And as Phil said, the ending makes it all the much better. Because up to that point, it is a great fight up to that point. But just the ending, it just puts like a cherry on top of the cake. And it's up there. It's in the conversation. Like if Bert Sugar says it's the greatest fight of all time, I'm not going to you can't argue, because this is definitely in the conversation as one of the greatest fights of all time in terms of what they do. And yeah, it's so sad. And like the beautiful thing about the fight, about Corrales after the fight, he actually takes time to stop Jim Gray and say, look, talk about charity research, cancer research, and give a mention to, must have been a friend of his who was suffering from cancer. And yeah, I came across him a couple of times, and he seemed like a really nice fella. But yeah, it's a sad loss, really. That these guys, they burn, those stars, they burn bright, but they burn out fast, don't they? Sometimes they're not meant to be here that long,
And like, it's no solace to the family or anything, but like Gatti is immortalized for those fights. Corrales similarly, like in 100 years and 200 years, people will still be talking about these fights. So that's a nice thing in one sense. Bill, last word to you. Any last thoughts before we wrap up here?
No, you think of what they went on to do after, and obviously you mentioned 2 years later, and Corrales suffers that motorbike accident, and then you think of Castillo. Maybe people wouldn't have been too familiar with him, but then they would have seen him fight Ricky Hatton, which probably would have made him more of a household name, because there was so many people tuning in to watch Ricky Hatton, and obviously Hatton stopped them quite early. And I actually after I watched the Corrales and Castillo fight, I watched back the Hatton fight, and yeah, it was just different. Like, it wasn't the same. Castillo and Hatton completely outworked him, frustrated him, and then obviously finishes him with a body shot. Also, as well, I know I'm speaking about Hatton, this is the anniversary for when Pacquiao beat Hatton as well. So I watched that as well, all two rounds of it.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to watch that one. And Mayweather Pacquiao as well, which if Mayweather Pacquiao had been as good as Corrales Castillo, I think we'd still be talking about that one. But that's pretty much it. Any final thoughts to you, Andy, before we let you go?
No, I think we covered it all. It was a sensational fight, and it was great to rewatch it. And if people haven't watched it, I'm sure they will after hearing this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Jim Gray. He said it's the best fight he's ever seen, and Al Bernstein said it's the best fight he's ever called. And Showtime Boxing is historic. They've had some tremendous fights on that network. So to put it up there, it shows you what we're talking about
and here. One thing about it is the commentators do a great job as well.
Yeah,
they actually made it's like the perfect storm. They did a fantastic job.
Absolutely. Well, thanks as ever, lads. It's been a pleasure. Cheers, Andy. Cheers, Phil.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, lads.
And thanks to everyone at home for listening. We'll chat to you soon.